the Abbasid Caliphate, the Mongols, the Ottomans, the Spanish Empire, the British Empire. Completely different people, different centuries, different weapons, different gods, different maps, and almost every one of them fell apart at roughly the same age, about 250 years, 10 generations, then gone. One retired general noticed this pattern, and it kept him up at night, because if it's real, it isn't about Rome or Britain or any of them. It's about something that happens to every group of humans that gets too comfortable, and it might be happening right now. The general was Sir John Glubb. He'd spent his life inside empires, commanding armies in the Middle East, watching the British Empire in its final decades, and in 1978 he sat down and did something simple. He lined up the great empires of history and measured how long each one lasted from birth to breakdown. Assyria, about 250 years. Persia, 250. The Roman Republic, 250. The Arab Empire, 250. The Ottomans at their height, about 250. The British Empire, roughly 250. Different worlds, the same lifespan, and Glubb noticed something even stranger. They didn't just die at the same age. They died the same way, going through the same stages, in the same order, like a disease with a fixed set of symptoms. So what are the symptoms? And why 250 years? Why 10 generations almost every time? Glubb said every empire climbs and falls through the same phases. It starts with the pioneers, a poor, tough, hungry people on the edge of the map. They have nothing, so they have everything to gain. They're brave, they improvise, they outwork everyone. This is the age of conquest. Then comes the age of commerce. The conquering is done. Now there's territory, trade routes, safety. Money starts pouring in. The empire gets rich, and for a while, it's still run by the tough, disciplined children of the pioneers. Then, the age of affluence. This is the peak. The biggest buildings, the grandest art, the most powerful army. From the outside, the empire has never looked stronger. But this is exactly the moment the rot starts. Because the people living at the peak were born at the peak. They never knew the struggle. They inherited the wealth without inheriting the hunger that built it. And slowly, the thing that made the empire great, the willingness to sacrifice for something bigger than yourself, starts to quietly disappear. There's a fingerprint this decline leaves behind. You can literally hold it in your hand. Money. Take Rome. When the Emperor Augustus ruled, the Roman silver coin, the denarius, was almost pure silver, around 95%. But an empire at its peak is expensive. Armies on every border, free grain for the cities, games, monuments, an ever-growing government. The bills come due. And instead of raising taxes, which people hate, Roman rulers found a quieter trick. They melted down the coins and mixed in a little cheap metal, then a little more, then more. By the mid-200s AD, the denarius was less than 5% silver, 95% silver down to 5 in a couple of centuries. The coin looked the same. It just wasn't worth the same. Prices exploded. Trust in the money collapsed. Soldiers demanded to be paid in real goods because the currency was a joke. And here's the pattern that should make the hair on your neck stand up. This same move, a government quietly making its money worth less to pay for a lifestyle it can't afford, shows up in the final act of empire after empire after empire. It's one of the most reliable warning lights in all of history. The second symptom is the opposite of a money problem. It's a map problem. At the peak, an empire keeps expanding. More borders, more territory, more enemies to keep out. But every mile of new border costs money and soldiers to defend. Past a certain point, the empire is spending more to hold what it has than it ever gained by taking it. Historians have a name for the general version of this: imperial overstretch. The empire becomes a business that's losing money on every sale, but trying to make it up in volume. Rome bled itself defending frontiers thousands of miles from home. The point where the map stops growing is almost always the point where the clock starts ticking down. So, case closed? Empires die at 250 years? Here's the proof? No. And this is the part most videos won't tell you. Glubb's theory has a serious problem, and honesty demands we say it out loud. He picked his examples. Line up empires that lasted about 250 years. And of course, you'll find a pattern of 250 years, because plenty of empires break the rule completely. The Eastern Roman Empire, Byzantium, lasted over 1,000 years. Ancient Egypt held together on and off for 3,000. The Republic of Venice ran for 1,000 years. If there were an iron law that empires die at 250, none of these should exist. And empire is a slippery word. When exactly does one start? When does it end? Rome went from kingdom to republic to empire to a divided east and west. Historians still argue about where to draw the lines. Move the start date 50 years, and the whole neat 250 can vanish. So the specific number is not science. It's a pattern with the losers quietly left out. But here's why the idea refuses to die, why it still feels true even after you debunk the number. Because underneath the shaky math, Glubb was pointing at something real. The thing that actually kills empires isn't a stopwatch, it's a loss of shared purpose. Look at what all the genuine collapses have in common, not the years, the symptoms, a currency the rulers quietly cheapen, wealth piling up at the very top while everyone else feels the ground shifting, a ruling class that stops believing in the project and starts just extracting from it, and a generation that grew up in the finished house and never learned why the walls were load-bearing. That last one is the deepest. An empire is built by people willing to sacrifice for something they'll never personally see finished. It dies when enough people stop believing there's anything worth sacrificing for, when us quietly becomes me. That's not a rule about Rome, that's a rule about humans. It's why the pattern rhymes across 3,000 years and a dozen languages, not because history runs on a clock, but because comfort does the same thing to people every single time, and most of them never see it happening. So, do empires collapse after exactly 250 years? No. That number is a story we told ourselves to make chaos feel neat. But do they rot from the inside in the same recognizable way? Cheapened money, overstretched borders, a soft generation that inherited a fortune it didn't understand. That part is real, and it has repeated so many times it's hard to look away from. The empires that lasted, the Byzantiums, the Egypts, the Venice, weren't the ones with the biggest armies. They were the ones that kept reinventing a reason to exist before the old one wore out. Which leaves one uncomfortable question, not, how long do we have, but, what are we still willing to build that we'll never live to see finished? Because that answer, not the calendar, is the one that decides.